Hello again, everyone. In this video, I will be introducing you to systematic reviews and meta-analyses. Okay, so first, the basics. What is a systematic review? Well, the important thing to know about systematic reviews is that these do not involve any new data collection. Okay, they are in-depth reviews of published literature for a specific topic or research question. So basically, researchers are gathering the published data that's available and conducting an analysis of all of them together to be able to provide a stronger conclusion. There's no new data collection, meaning no one is going out and surveying new participants for this. So you can think about basically doing a search on PsycInfo of depression in adolescent females and pulling together all of the different articles they see with certain inclusion and exclusion criteria and reading them all and combining their findings. Okay, and the benefit to this is that one article showing a treatment's effectiveness is great, but then what if you have 20 showing the same thing? That's even better. Okay. You could also think about this a different way. You're taking a research methods class here today, and you'll learn something, hopefully, by the end of the semester, which is great. But if you then go and take 3 more research methods classes, you're going to have an even stronger knowledge, right? Okay. So let's talk about some of the advantages here. Oh, and this is stuff that I've already talked about. So basically, more evidence in more settings with more participants. So each of these articles is going to be a little bit different, right? And they're going to have slightly different participants or slightly different situations. Like maybe one article was done with all Latinos, another one was done with all Japanese Americans, another one was done with only adolescents, whatever. And if they're finding the same results with all these different participants, that's a very strong indicator that this intervention or this assessment tool or what have you is useful and effective, right? And in terms of more settings, maybe one article was done in California and another was nationwide and another one was maybe in a different country. And so this shows the generalizability of that particular intervention or tool. Okay, so advantages. First, using a systematic review is going to improve external validity. And external validity is a fancy way of saying generalizability, meaning this particular assessment tool, this self-report measure, isn't only useful for adolescents between 12 and 15 who are male, who live in a low-income neighborhood and have never experienced trauma. That would be very small external validity because it's narrowed down how many people fit into that very small box. But if we have, again, these multiple studies that are using different populations and in different settings, then more people fit into those different boxes and those boxes are bigger. And so we can say more about the use of this particular intervention or tool, okay? So one study with one sample, it's like in an experiment, versus several studies using several samples in several different situations. It's going to be better, more external validity. Where can you find this information about which studies they looked at and who the participants were in those studies and how many studies were reviewed? You look in the methods section of the systematic review, and that will tell you which studies were used and why, who the populations were, so ages, genders, ethnicities, all of those kinds of things, and how many studies did they actually look at. Another strength is that it's going to be able to critique the design of the original studies. So these are independent researchers that take the designs apart of those individual studies in order to identify any flaws the study may have and any threats to internal validity. Now, if we're looking at peer-reviewed journal articles, most of these have already been vetted by experts in the field, but it's still good to have an independent researcher come in and take another look at them, okay? And you would find this information in the results section. They're going to describe any kinds of risks, any flaws, any threats to validity, any other issues to consider are all going to be in the results section of the systematic review. Systematic reviews are also going to be faster and more efficient. It's faster for you, the new researcher, to review one systematic review that includes 20 articles than it is for you to find all 20 of those and read all 20 of those. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't do that, right? You should always go back to the original source and take a look at it to make sure things weren't taken out of context, to make your own interpretations, and to get more details about the study, okay? But this does allow you to get a really nice broad overview of the topic and the work that's been done, okay? You should also be mindful of the years that the studies were completed, okay? More recent, obviously, is going to be better. As a matter of fact, I definitely recommend, as you all are getting started on your project, that you look for a systematic review so that you can get a broad overview of what's been done, and you can use the reference section to find more articles to read. Where to find information about how much research has been done and what the results were. Check the abstract first. It's going to give you an overview of the information. Then check the discussion and conclusion section to find what the general findings were and what they mean. Okay. And you can see how many studies did you review just by looking at that systematic review. Now, of course, there are disadvantages to using a systematic review. One is if you end up going into autopilot, so relying on the reviews blindly without using your own critical thinking skills. You remember that clinical judgment and client characteristics are important when doing evidence-based practice. The same is true of reading articles, okay? You still need to think about the conclusions that they draw and make sure that they are lining up, that they are accurate, and that they apply to your particular client. So don't go on autopilot. Inclusion and exclusion criteria are also something to consider. These researchers that complete these systematic reviews can't possibly review every single article that's been done related to this particular topic. So they have what are called inclusion, meaning what to include, and exclusion, meaning what to exclude criteria. And they will decide which which studies they're going to include in their review. And you want to know how they made that decision. Does it make sense how they made that decision? Okay, I can give you an example, not of a systematic review, but of research that I've done. So for my dissertation, I was interested in young children between the ages of 3 and 5, but I had a national survey of children 0 to 18. So part of my inclusion criteria were children between the ages of 3 and 5, and I excluded anyone under 3 or over 5. And again, this is important to make sure that the systematic review is relevant to your particular client and their circumstances. You'd also find this in the methods section. There's usually a table that shows what they started with, how many surveys they started with, and then how they narrowed down based on their inclusion and exclusion criteria. Okay, comprehensiveness. Does the systematic review include multiple kinds of intervention or only one? That's going to matter, okay? Are they comparing interventions to see which one is best? That would be ideal, right? But maybe that's not what their aim was. Perhaps they were just wanting to test the use of one intervention across multiple different populations. So you want to figure out that information as well, okay? Bias is also important. You want to know who funded and conducted the review, okay? If it was a cigarette company and they did a review of lung cancer studies, you can assume that they may be pretty biased because they're going to want to look at the studies that show that cigarettes don't cause lung cancer, right? So who conducted the research? Who funded the research? What was the purpose of the research? Okay, that's important. And you'll find that usually toward the end of the article where it talks about potential sources of bias. Okay, so that's a systematic review. Now I'm going to give you a very brief introduction into a meta-analysis. Okay, so what's the difference? What is a meta-analysis? Basically, these types of papers are doing the same thing in terms of gathering lots of different articles, but then what makes it different is that they are applying statistics to merge the findings of lots of different studies. In essence, every single study becomes a participant and they provide a statistical estimate of the overall effects across multiple studies, rather than simply appraising the design itself and the findings themselves. Okay. These studies may also find moderators, meaning things that affect the results that you may be seeing. Okay. And you would find this information in the results and discussion sections. They're going to provide you a lot of tables that are giving you the statistical strength of all of these articles put together. And so here's an example of a table that you might see, okay? And it's giving, this particular one is giving you pre and post-treatment effect sizes for psychosocial treatments across various outcomes. And so you'll see the list of the studies on the left here, okay? And then it's going to give you the baseline, meaning the pre-treatment, and the outcome, meaning the post-treatment, okay? And the effects here ranged from medium to very large, okay? And the confidence intervals didn't include 0, which means that it wasn't by chance. It was less likely to be by chance, okay? They also found a moderation effect of treatment type on ADHD symptom effect size with mindfulness mediation and skill-based treatment without mindfulness. So what does that mean? Basically, they found a larger effect, meaning the intervention was more effective if they used the mindfulness mediation than the ones that, sorry, I'm making this very complicated. They found basically that the type of treatment itself was a moderator, meaning that certain interventions were going to have a stronger effect than others based on what components they included. Did they include a skills-based treatment, or did they include mindfulness? And so there was a difference there. I won't get into more detail because that would just confuse you. So there you go. And this, of course, will be written out in a narrative in the discussion if you're not into tables. Okay. So now what do you do? So both meta-analyses and systematic reviews are useful in guiding your research, and they can help you to inform your goal setting with your client and your treatment planning. So what kind of goals are you going to come up with, and how are you going to go about treating them or reaching those goals? Okay, so let's review really quickly. A systematic review is an aggregation, meaning bringing together and review of studies related to a specific topic or research question. So multiple studies about a similar topic, and then appraising how well those studies were done. A meta-analysis is going to then take it a step further by applying statistical tests in order to combine the results of all of those different studies and arrive at a general larger conclusion, okay? The big difference, the studies are now participants as opposed to completing data collection, okay? So if you have 100 studies, that's now 100 data points, and it provides a springboard, a springboard for continued research. So it gives you some direction about where to go next, okay? So that is it. I definitely recommend looking for a systematic review or a meta-analysis for your topic, and I'm happy to help you find one if you're having a hard time. All right, thanks for listening.